Dolly Parton's childhood rag-stitched clothing made her a target for classroom bullies, but it ultimately inspired one of her greatest hits. Dolly Parton has been extremely open about the poverty that she was born into. In her memoir, Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business, she wrote that when she was born in the winter of 1946, it was an extremely difficult birth for her mother, even though she was the fourth child of what would eventually become 12 siblings. It was such a hard birth, in fact, that there were fears that either she or her mother might not survive. Parton wrote that the local doctor had risked his own life to travel along a treacherous mountain path during a storm. In recognition of the doctor's heroics, Parton would later become an honorary chairperson for the Dr. Robert F. Thomas Foundation, which is dedicated to improving healthcare for Sevier County, Tennessee. That's where she was born, and where he averaged about 1,000 such home visits each and every year during his long career. Parton says that her father hadn't been able to pay the doctor cash for riding out to deliver her, and instead gave him a sack of cornmeal. She wrote, "I have often joked that I have been raking in the dough ever since. Being born poor is something I am neither proud nor ashamed of." Parton said that even though they grew up incredibly poor, her parents Avie Lee and Robert Lee Parton made it clear that they treasured and loved all of their children.
Willadine, David, Coy, Bobby, Stella, Cassie, Larry, Randy, twins Floyd and Frida, Rachel, and of course, Dolly.
In her memoir, Dolly, she wrote, "I have found that poverty is something you don't really realize while you're in it, at least not if you're a kid with a head full of dreams and a house full of loving family." Parton described her father as a man who had worked as a sharecropper and had been dedicated to providing for his family. "My daddy was a smart man and a hard worker who carved out a life for us with his hands and his strong back. I could always see the tenderness in his eyes." Memories of her mother, too, are of a loving woman. But she said that she also got plenty of what she called plain old Tennessee butt whippings. Her mother would hit them with the switch, while her father would use a leather strap as discipline, which Parton said she personally didn't consider to be abuse.
Daddy hardly ever would whip us unless he really caught us doing something, and usually when he did, we wouldn't tell on each other. He'd have to whip us all in a group.
Parton wrote in her memoir that some of her earliest memories involved the woman she called Aunt Marth. Martha Williams wasn't her aunt by blood. Instead, she owned the land where Parton's father worked as a sharecropper. Parton wrote, "I couldn't have loved her more. I was often left with her when I was little. She was a good friend to me, and she made me feel special." Parton recalled Aunt Marth's home as being equal parts welcoming and amazing. There were always hoe cakes and gingerbread treats, songs to be sung, and hypnotic sights like a giant spinning wheel. They moved away to a new house when Parton was 5, and her beloved Aunt Marth died 3 years later. When they returned to pay their respects, Parton wrote that she wished she hadn't seen the figure lying in the open coffin. She recalled being tormented by some of the boys who were also there, who told her stories of embalming and burial and even forced her to touch the dead body. The terrible experience had a lasting impact. She no longer attends funerals. Dolly Parton has never shied away from topics like faith and religion, and it's been an important part of her life since childhood. In 1977, she was interviewed for a massive Rolling Stone story. One of the things they touched on was her religious upbringing, and she was straightforward about the fact that she believed in God, and also believed that she was a sinner, although she noted, "I think I'm a vanilla sinner, too bad to be good and too good to be bad." Parton was always up close and personal with religion, as her grandfather was the local church's preacher. "I remember the hellfire and brimstone he used to preach, and how I used to be real scared of that. And I think that inspired me or depressed me into writing all these sad, mournful songs. You kind of grew up in a horrid atmosphere about fear of religion. We thought God was a monster in the sky." Parton wrote that she found comfort in the imaginary friends that she called her angels. She said that she had always felt very, very different, and explained that her angels were always understanding, always with her, and supported her with an understanding that she struggled to find elsewhere. "They understood why I had to sing, why I had such dreams."
But my dream was always to make as many people happy as I could.
Dolly Parton is famously from rural Tennessee, but to be more specific, she's from a town called Sevierville.
Even decades later, locals told stories to Good Housekeeping about envying the family's massive patch of potatoes. and the fact that her mother's skill as a cook meant they always had decent meals.
The town didn't begin to incorporate electricity until 1939, and in hindsight, Parton says they all took it in stride.
I have often joked that we had 2 rooms and a bath and running water, if you were willing to run to get it. She also wrote that when they moved into a new house, she was excited to see what newspapers the previous occupants had used to insulate the walls and fill in the cracks. That said, it wasn't all bad. Faye Dunn grew up near the Parton family and recalled that for all their hardships, "I always loved to go to the Parton house because they all had so much fun. Dolly was the happiest person I ever saw."
I loved growing up in the Great Smoky Mountains and seeing the beauty that God created in those hills and valleys every day.
In 1989, Dolly Parton sat down to talk with Interview magazine around the release of Steel Magnolias and said that those who had the most influence on the development of her musical talents were her family. "I grew up singing in the church, hearing my uncles and aunts sitting around, picking guitars and banjos and mountain instruments and singing. That, more than the big stars, was my introduction to music." In another interview, Parton spoke about listening to her cousin play the mandolin and her grandfather playing the fiddle. They'd had a broken-down piano, too, but it was the banjo that captivated her above all others. She told The Guardian that her mother and her mother's entire family loved music and added that her own siblings were less than thrilled when she would insist on taking center stage during whatever performances they were putting on. "They had no interest in taking a back seat to me." But she said that her Uncle Bill recognized she was different and helped make her dreams a reality. "As I was growing up, he's the one who saw my potential and worked so hard to give me a chance in the business." Parton's imagination library and child literacy programs are just a small part of what she's done to give back to the world, but it's possible that these are the most meaningful. Why? She developed the program to honor her father. She explained to ABC News that she always knew it bothered her father that he hadn't been able to read and write. "He seemed so crippled by that, but Daddy was so smart. I felt I wanted to do something to honor my dad." Parton has also said that when she was growing up, they weren't even allowed to have their school books in the house, for a strange reason. "We had so many little kids in the house. They would just chew them up, tear them up, pee on them, whatever." As a result, other than the Bible, reading only took place at school. But Parton says that her father was incredibly proud of her work with the Imagination Library. "He loved hearing the kids call me the book lady."
I started this program in honor of my daddy who never learned to read and write, and I know that he is smiling from above on this one.
Even though Dolly Parton talks about her childhood with fondness, that doesn't mean that it was free of tragedy. In her memoir, Dolly, she talked about her mother's terrifying bout of spinal meningitis, an infection and inflammation of the structures around the brain and spinal cord. Severe cases are fatal, and according to Parton, doctors had told their family that her mother wasn't expected to survive. When she did, doctors described her recovery as miraculous. Tragedy followed on the heels of that miracle, though, which was dramatized in the film Coat of Many Colors. Avie Lee Parton had been pregnant, and she told Dolly that the baby was going to be her special sibling. As the firstborn crop of kids got old enough to have some responsibility, Mama would assign each of us a little one in the next wave to help care for. Dolly's special sibling was going to be the new baby, Larry, but sadly, Larry died the day after he was born. Parton wrote, "For the first time in my life, I couldn't sing. I wouldn't leave Larry's grave. I would take a lantern up on the hill and sit there most of the night talking to him and crying."
Your songbird lost her voice, and you're the only one that can help her find it.
According to her first teacher, Mrs. Archie Ray McMahon, just getting to school wasn't easy for Parton. She had about a 2-mile walk to get to the rather remote schoolhouse, and when it was snowing or cold, she said students were nearly frozen by the time they got there. And considering she probably first started making the trek when she was just 2 or 3 years old, it's not surprising that McMahon remembered sitting with the students and rubbing their feet and legs to restore circulation. But why was she in school so young? It was normal at the time. Older brothers and sisters would bring their younger siblings along with them. McMahon shared her most vivid memory of Parton, who was enrolled as a student when she was 5. She was teaching the students to read and realized that Parton wasn't reading the book, but reciting from memory. So I got some flashcards and worked with her, and then she learned to read. The thing I remember best about her is that she was always ready with an answer. Parton admitted in her memoir that she had what she called a streak of devilment in me. It was never malicious, though. And even though it was more often curiosity that got her into trouble, trouble was definitely a big part of her life. But so was the kindness and compassion that would later come to define her as an adult. And she shared stories of how she would spend some quality time with her paternal grandmother. Parton said that after giving birth to her last child, Bessie Parton had developed a condition where movement, her own or the movement of those around her, would make her sick. Bedridden by her condition, Parton recalled, "I just couldn't stand to see her just lying there. It seemed like somebody had to mess with her to remind her she was still alive. I took on that job." That meant antics like sliding a frozen bedpan under the sheets and trying on her false teeth, then dancing just out of arm's reach. But Parton says that they also shared an incredible bond. She would brush her grandmother's hair and care for her nails, brush those false teeth, and she was the only grandchild who would sit with her. She loved for me to do that. I'd massage her feet and do whatever I could to make her feel better. Most kids go through a phase of struggling with their self-image, and that's true even for those who grow up to be rich and famous. In her memoir, Parton wrote about always comparing herself to her sisters and feeling as though she could never quite measure up to them. She grew envious, saying, "I was a pale, skinny thing with corn teeth and hair that was fine and close to my head. And then there were those hated freckles." That led to a major conflict with her parents, particularly her father. Parton wrote that he didn't think that makeup was an acceptable thing for his daughters to wear, and banned her and her sisters from using it. That, she said, made them want to experiment with cosmetics even more. And not only did they definitely go all in as soon as they left home, but Parton says that she improvised while still under her parents' roof. Parton wrote that these makeup experiments turned out to be dangerous, as some of the things she used as lipstick actually contained mercury and were later banned.
It's amazing how much it costs to make a person look so cheap.
In 2022, Dolly Parton sat down to talk to Better Homes and Gardens about what might be her favorite holiday, Christmas. She starts decorating while there are still Thanksgiving leftovers that need to be finished off. And there's one tradition that remains the same. The first ornament hung on her Christmas tree is a patchwork star that her mother had made years ago. Growing up, she said that the Christmas decorations were popcorn garland, colored pieces of paper and fabric, and eggs covered in foil. She also still has live trees, because heading out with her father to pick out their Christmas tree was a time-honored family tradition.
And we'd all want to hold the axe, but he wouldn't let us, because we'd have probably chopped each other to pieces.
Parton wrote in her memoir, Dolly, that while her grandmother would sometimes order toys for the kids out of the Sears catalog, it wasn't even about the toys even when she was little. Instead, it was gathering fresh snow to make snow cream, a version of ice cream, making gingerbread men to decorate the tree, singing Christmas carols, and telling stories. Christmas stockings were filled with candies and other goodies. Each of the siblings would get at least one store-bought gift, and her father would always get a box of chocolate-covered cherries and some handkerchiefs. One of Dolly Parton's biggest hits, Coat of Many Colors, is not only a favorite, but it captures one of the most vivid memories of her childhood. She explained to Southern Living, "Whenever I sing that, I just see my whole childhood." Her coat of many colors was made out of necessity. Winter was coming, and her mother made her own out of rags, bits, and pieces of fabric. She told GPB, "So while she made that coat, she told me the story about Joseph in the Bible. And boy, I thought I just really looked like Joseph. And I was so proud of it and wore it to school. And the kids laughed and said it was just rags. And I didn't look like Joseph. And that we were poor and all that. I remember crying so hard." She wrote in her memoir, Dolly, about just how much the coat had meant to her. It had, after all, been something her mother made just for her, something that was hers and hers alone, made with such love. Even after the kids at school laughed at her and made fun of her, she wrote, "They would not shake my pride in my coat, my love for my mother, my faith in myself. I would not have it." Even though Dolly Parton has said that what her family lacked in finances, they made up for in love, school was still difficult for her. She wrote in her memoir, Dolly, that going to school made her realize how little they had. They would be asked to tell the class what they had for breakfast, and she quickly grew embarrassed about only having biscuits and gravy. Embarrassment gave way to violence at one point, as she recalled the children of another family targeting her and her brothers. "We would come home beaten up every day. We stayed sore and bruised all the time." When her father went over to try to settle the matter, she said that it turned into a massive fight involving the adults too, leading to a civil court case that was eventually thrown out. But school continued to be the sort of thing that's better off forgotten, and was punctuated with terrible memories. One friend who spoke to Good Housekeeping said many weren't nice to her, adding, "When Dolly comes home, she's nice to everyone, but you can tell she remembers who treated her badly." And that extended to very public ridicule. The first in her family to graduate, she got up on the graduation stage and shared her dreams of making it big in Nashville, and was met with laughter. Parton was 10 years old when she first headed to the big city of Knoxville, Tennessee. It opened up a whole new world for her. She wrote in her memoir that she'd go there anytime she had a few days off from school, and that she very quickly learned about some of the pleasures that life had to offer outside of her rural home, like fast food. Jiffy Burgers were wonderfully greasy little sliders from a place near Aunt Estelle's house. I wanted them more than anything. To me, they represented everything that mountain life wasn't. Good Housekeeping spoke with performer and songwriter Pearl Butler, who opened her home to Parton the year after she first hit the city. It was Butler who recalled taking her to buy her first bra, and who made her a chocolate cake that she was so excited about she dove face first into it. Butler was who took Parton to see movies in the theater, and who remembered a young girl who was in awe of conveniences she was just starting to learn about. Light switches, flushing toilets, electricity. It was a taste of a much bigger world that would, after considerable struggle, heartbreak, and challenges, be Dolly's for the taking.